Okay, so we can start. I would like to welcome all participants to this 7th Internationalastril Conference and thank the Department of Economics at Roma 3 for its organizational support, as well as for their sponsorships. The Italian Association of Labor Economists, INAP, the European Association of Evolutionary Political Economy, the Jean Monnet Center of Excellence, Labor Welfare and Social Rights, and the Domenico De Masi of Fatto Quotidiano. I would also like to thank Dr. Andrea Brandolini of Bank of Italy and Professor Rochon at Laurentian University for having accepted our invitation to give the keynote speeches of our conference, as well as the participants to our plenary sessions, and specifically Professor Baussola, Tridico, and Viesti, who will participate this afternoon to our plenary session. This year, the conference focuses on challenges for the labor market, stemming not only from global and persistent economic crisis, but also from other phenomena that are reshaping it. Italy and Europe in particular are facing significant migration flows, which are influencing and modifying labor force dynamics and relationships between workers. They are also experiencing demographic shift and an aging population, which have been central to justifying retirement system reforms in many European countries. Moreover, structural changes and innovation, also spurred by the challenges of climate change, the globalization, and the Next Generation EU program, are exerting a significant influence on the skilled and unskilled labor force composition and could potentially increase labor market fragmentation and dualization. A specific issue, namely the effect of artificial intelligence on the labor market, will be addressed in the plenary session held on Friday, organized together with the Domenico De Masi School. As recently pointed out by the International Monetary Fund, its effects on the labor market could be really relevant, with possibly also an increase in structural unemployment. In light of all these issues, public policies must be comprehensive, encompassing not only macroeconomic policy and fiscal rules that possibly foster aggregate labor demand, but also the establishment of suitable institutions aimed at preventing the deterioration of labor conditions. Mandatory components of this respect include establishing a minimum wage, ensuring a well-organized unemployment benefit system, and addressing social contribution. Our 7th Internationalastril Conference has brought together contribution in these fields on both theoretical and empirical grounds. We have received a large number of papers and have organized 2 plenary sessions, 5 special sessions, and 13 parallel sessions with a total of 83 presentations. They concern mainly structural changes in the labor market, but also macroeconomic issues and the reshaping of the welfare system. In this respect, I must thank INAP, INPS, EPKN, and the SDMRG group for the organization of very interesting special sessions. In our 2 keynote speeches, 2 themes of the conference will be specifically addressed, namely the effects of demographic changes on growth perspective, thanks to Dr. Brandolini, and the appropriate monetary policy to foster economic growth. That's all. I don't want to take more time. And before the speech of Dr. Brandolini, I would like to briefly give the floor to Professor Costantini, head of our department. Yes.
Thank you very much. Good morning to all of you. Welcome to our, let me say, really interesting and quite dense event that is organized by our department. Hello, Pasquale. And I'm particularly happy to be here as the head of the Department of Economics, hosting this event with all these scholars, young and less young, let me say. So it's a pleasure always to see PhD students and research fellows in room, as well as also colleagues. I'm searching for Sebastiano. I don't see him in the room. Okay, but he was here right 1 minute ago. And anyway, let me say something about the relevance of the topic covered by this conference, this event, let me say. with respect to the themes and the issues that are developed under different research lines in this department. I think that working on the role of public policies for covering the main structural changes that are occurring in this period, especially in this period, I say, it's something that economists, so scholars, researchers working in academics and not on, I was thinking about Bank of Italy, for instance, working on the key relationships between the labor market and all the social aspects with which the labor market issues are interrelated. I think that it is worthwhile not only for our, academic success, but also for the society. So it's a duty that academics and researchers should comply with. And given that, I see that the keynote speeches are quite relevant. Going to this topic covered by the lecture by Andrea Brandolini on the demographic decline and prospects for economic growth, let me say something as head of a university institution. Together with economic growth, in pure term, let me say the increasing GDP, we have also something to face related to the decline of the number of students that will take an academic career. So that there are problems in the long run, but also problems in the shorter run, including the fact that we are facing a reduction in the number of students that are going to be our students. This means that we will have a lower possibility in having high graduated workers. So it's not only a matter of the availability of high-skilled workers in the long run, but also in the medium term. And this is also something related to the sustainability, not only from the pure fiscal point of view, but also from the social point of view. Because not having enough young scholars and young high graduated students, it's something that is going to affect the whole society, not only economic growth. So I'm particularly happy to see that together with this topic, also things related to productivity, for example, decline or inequality issues, and also the interrelations between the labor market and all the topics covered by the recovery plan are also coped in this event. So I think that it is something to be sustained by the Department of Economics in order to be, on top of the current debate. I don't mention the international crisis, but we all know that also the current geopolitical difficulties are influencing the overall labor market, including, for example, the global value chains and all the breaks that are occurring in the fluidity of the globalization, let me say. So I don't keep more time to the audience and to the lecturers. I do thank the organizers, Sergio and also Pasquale, for this event, and I wish you to enjoy these 2 days very intense event.
Thank you, Valeria. And now Professor Fadda, President of INAP.
Thank you. Good morning and welcome to everybody. Since this sequence of annual International Astral Conference was started, it did happen when I was the president of this association. It has received always the interest, the support, and the collaboration of the National Institute for the Analysis of Public Policies. And now, as president of this institute, I am glad to renew this interest, this support, and this collaboration, and wish that it may continue for the next future. The common involvement of these two entities, the association and the institute, in the purpose of analyzing the dynamics, the evolution of the labor market and related aspects and related public policies, give me the occasion to think, to offer to you some thought which I think are relevant for the mission of researchers, and particularly of researchers in economics. As you, all of you probably remember, on November 2008, soon after the explosion of the global financial crisis, Queen Elizabeth went to the London School of Economics on visit in the occasion of the inauguration of the new buildings of the London School of Economics. And after being informed about the details of the critical situation of the crisis, she asked the professor, why did nobody notice it? This was the question. Why did nobody notice it? And the professors couldn't give an answer at the moment, but quite a few times afterwards sent a letter to the Queen apologizing, deeply apologizing for having failed to predict what was going to happen, and trying to mention the causes of this failure. And they said, I quote, the failure of the collective imagination, the main cause, they say, was the failure of the collective imagination of many bright people. And I think the economists were considered bright people in this sense, both in this country and internationally, to understand the risks to the system as a whole. So the cause was the failure of the collective imagination of bright people, researchers and scholars, to understand the risks. You can see that this statement fails to pick up the causes of the failure. The failure was that the bright people did not understand what was happening. But I don't enter the question of why they failed to understand this. Obviously, this has to be is something to be inquired. But I can learn a lesson from this episode, from this question. And the lesson is that the role of the researcher in economics and social sciences should be to capture and to detect the signals of the processes which are on the way before they are accomplished, so that really effective policies can be taken to cope with problems. Arriving late with the analysis jeopardizes the effectiveness and the success of the policy measures. And too often, I must say, the work of the research in economics fails to detect the signals of the process that are on the way, and devote seem to devote their interest to a description, merely to a description of what has happened, a description of the situation, establishes correlation between the variables of the situation, but not on tracking and interpreting the signals of what is going to happen. And too often the interest of researchers are not devoted to interpret the signals of what is going to happen and the reason and the dynamics of the structural change that is continuously taking place, but they concentrate often on issues of little relevance as far as the process of a structural change is concerned. Well, I am glad to notice and to say that this is not the case of this conference. Looking at the program is very promising as far as the issue that are implied by the speeches and the presentation. And the program shows a prevalent orientation towards analyzing the process which is taking place and to try to suggest measures to fight against the possible bad evolution of the process. Just to quote some of them, is the question of the issue of demographic trends, which calls for measures to prevent the explosion of the crisis in the near future. There is the issue of inflation, which calls for detecting and fighting the causes of the inflation. And failure to understand the causes may lead to take wrong measures to fight the inflation. And perhaps attention should be devoted to the extremely high power of monopolistic institution and too many price makers and too few price takers. Imperfect competition plays a role about this. New forms of work and work organization and new jobs, a typical gig economy, work on platform, call for new forms of regulation and new kind of industrial relations, and so on. We have the issues of sustainability, artificial intelligence, digital economy, regional inequality, personal functional and personal inequality in income distributions, and so on. All issues which deserve great attention to discover and to analyze the elements of the process which is going on. So the amount of contribution of which are in program for these 2 days of intense work are of most relevance in promising in the contribution that will derive for the deep understanding on the process. I wish you therefore the best success of the conference and of your personal involvement in the effort to analyze and understand what is going on and what is going to happen and what is necessary to pilot and to govern the process of structural change. Thank you and have a nice day and good work in these days.
Thank you, to Professor Fadda. Thank you to Professor Costantini. And we can pass now to our keynote speech held by Dr. Brandolini of Bank of Italy and entitled Italy's Demographic Decline and Prospects for Economic Growth. Brandolini is a well-known economist, so I'll just give a little bit of information about him. He's deputy head of the Economics and Statistics Department of the Bank of Italy. He was president of the International Association for Research in Income and Wealth. He is a fellow of the Human Development and Capability Association and of the Institute of Labor Economics. He was associate editor of the Journal of Economic Inequality and now is part of the editorial boards of the Italian Economic Journal and of Politics Journal of Economic Policy. Finally, as all of us know, he has published important works on poverty, the distribution of income and wealth, and on issues of labor economics and on the history of economic thought. So, please, Dr. Brandolini, the floor is yours.
And hear me if I speak. No. So I mustn't. Okay. No, it's okay. I talk from here. Thank you and good morning to everybody. Thank you to Sergio for the nice words and thank you to Pasquale. They both invited me to come here to give this keynote. And I'm very glad to be at University of Rome 3. I was here a few years ago, actually, for opening the academic year or something like that. And today I will talk of something that is rather important and concerning, that is the demographic outlook, actually the demographic decline that Italy is facing, and trying to make some considerations on whether this or the extent to which this can be a problem for economic growth in Italy. And I don't know, in terms of Professor Fadda distinction between description and interpretation, we need more interpretation. I hope that I won't well, stay too much on the side of description, but I think that first of all, we need to put all facts together to understand what to do. So let's see at the end. Now, when we talk about population and growth, we have, it is interesting to see a very sharp change in perspective from the past. I have here two quotations, just to give you the idea of what I have in mind. One by Simon Kuznets that he wrote in 1966, just before getting the Nobel Prize for Economics. To what extent does a high rate of population growth impede the growth of per capita product? And at the time, the prevailing idea was that strong population growth is bad for economic growth. And especially in developing countries that have a surplus of labor and lack capital. Now, at least in advanced countries, the concerns tend to be the opposite, and that is the quotation from a recent report of the European Commission exactly on demographic changes. And it says that in the coming years, that is stated up front, the shrinking and continued aging of the EU population risks negatively impacting the EU long-term competitiveness. So that is the issue on which I will try to say something. Now, the problems posed by demographic outlook are well known, and were well known and explained by demographers long ago. Here you can read by yourself the citation from Massimo Livi Bacci, the main Italian, most important Italian demographer, in 2000, stating that European societies must now be accustomed to a situation in which human resources are not as abundant as they were before. So the issue becomes that of addressing labor shortages And that is only one dimension. One other dimension was mentioned before by Valeria Costantini, the shrinking number of students in universities or in schools. That is another. So there are many dimensions of this change in the demography. The typical answer by politicians is to focus on lower birth rates, on the fertility rate. And again, I cite here Emmanuel Macron's recent speech at the beginning of the year that called for a demographic rearmament, with a very strange use of words. But the emphasis is entirely on the fertility rate in the debate, or mainly on the fertility rate. But changing the fertility rate is not going to't the demographic trends in the next 25 years. And those are the trends that we have to face now. So the short run, as Valeria Costantini said before, is absolutely crucial. Now, I will make some considerations for the case of Italy. That is interesting for a couple of reasons. Apart from that, it is interesting for us as Italians, for those who are Italians here, and for me working in the central bank of Italy. The two reasons why the considerations for Italy are important is that Italy is a country with a very significant demographic decline, one of the most rapid in the world. And this is a chart to give you some long-term perspective. And it is the population dynamics in Italy from 1950 till 2050. So until 2022, yes. It is history. After that, it is based on the projections made by Istat. And you can see that the total population increased up to a maximum in 2014, and then has been declining since then. And it is predicted to decline even further by 2050. Can you hear? Okay. So I can't stand up. Yes. Because I don't like. But what is more important is the change in the working age population. So people from in the age 15 to 64. And you see, according to Istat projections, that is the median scenario, I will come back to that later. In 2050, so in only 25 years, we will have a number of people in that age class below the level we had in 1950. See, over 100 years, we have a decline in the population, in the working age. That is what is going to, that is employment. And again, if we will simply take that is my own, it is not a prediction or not even a projections, that is just the employment rate of 2022 kept constant until 2050. And you see, if this happens, we had 20 million employed in 1950, we will have 20 million after 100 years. So that is the first aspect. The second aspect, why the case of Italy is important and interesting, is that Italy is the only advanced countries facing a prolonged stagnation or serious growth difficulties. Now we can discuss for many hours what are the reasons for this. I'm sure that there are very different views. It is not the focus of my topics, but now let me only stress that in terms of real GDP per capita, Italy had the worst performance among rich countries. So these are the two characteristics of Italy. So let me spend, that is the only slightly formal part of the presentation. I take real GDP per capita as indicators of the living standards. Of course, this is not a bad choice, but a very debatable choice for many reasons, and let me just quick refer to the capability approach by Amartya Sen, to the fact that income is only a dimension, not even the most important, well, probably the most important dimension to approximate well-being, but well-being is much richer than simply income. But let's take real GDP per capita as indicator. And then what we can do is to decompose real GDP per capita into 4 components. That is just an identity. The first component is hourly labor productivity times the hours worked per employed times the employment rate, so the proportion of the people in the working age population that work times the reciprocal of the dependency ratio. Dependency ratio is the share of people younger than of children and old people over the working age population. So this is just an identity. We can write, if we take the log standard thing, we take the log and the variation, so we proxy the annual variation of this variable, and we have this kind of decomposition. So that decomposition tells us that the income that each inhabitant can benefit from, on average is important, grows either because the first term people are more productive, or because more people are employed or work longer, H and E, or a combination of these two. After, however, taking into account that part of the product is assigned, again on average, also to those who do not work, and that is the last term. Okay, that is the simple framework. Now, let's apply this decomposition, rather mechanical decomposition, to Italian historical data from 1950 till 2022. This is the 50s, 60s. Each bar is an average for 10 years, except for the last bars that are for the 3 years, 20, 21, and 22. So the dark green is the change in hourly labor productivity. And you can see that is by far the dominant variable that determines the dynamic of per capita GDP, that is this line here. So the line is just the sum of the bars. So you have the period of economic miracle with very high growth, and then a gradual decline. This is the stagnation of the 2000s, the first 2 decades of the 2000s. And then this is the recovery that we had in 21 and 22. So it is remarkable in many ways because in these 3 years we have the effect of the COVID pandemic. So the dark green, hourly labor productivity is the dominant factor. Hours worked per employed is an important variable to look at. And we have that it played a negative role in terms of reducing the growth of GDP per capita in the 60s and 70s, and that is because contractual hours of work went down. We moved from 40 hours work per week to 40 hours. So that is a change in the annual hours of work per employee. And then there is a negative contribution here, this yellow part here, and that is entirely due to the spread, not entirely, but it is largely due to the spread of temporary work and part-time. Temporary because this is number of hours, total number of hours divided by the number of employed people. So if you have a spread of part-time, but if you have a spread of temporary work that alternates to period of employment, you have that over the year people work less hours. And that is the impact here. And then you have a small impact of population aging here. So that is the last term of my decomposition. Here the effect was positive, and that is the decade of the entry of the baby boom cohorts. So that gives you a picture of what happened to real GDP per capita in Italy real GDP increased 6.5 times over the period, on average by 2.6% per year. And as I said, the demographic variables didn't matter much. Now, a couple of warning caveats about this growth accounting. The first one is that should be very clear to anybody of you among you who is very who knows about Italian data. The very first problem is that there are many approximations. We might discuss the variables itself. So I use the GDP at market prices. It would be better probably to use value added at factor cost. So we might debate about that, but we have to live with the variables that are available. And the second point is that from 1995, data are consistent, internally consistent, because they align to national accounts, the system of European national accounts. Before 1995, many of the data are from different sources. It's a kind of patchwork, but the best thing I could do, giving information available. So, but you can get different numbers, even if I am sure that the overall message would not change. The second point is that the decomposition is totally mechanical. So the variables influence each other. They are not independent. And so, for example, if we reduce or increase the hours of work, that might have an effect on productivity and vice versa. Yet, as I said, the composition point at productivity as the key variable. Now, given this framework, what can we say about the future? I showed you already the median scenario of ISTAT, and just to give you some concrete numbers, in 2050, according to ISTAT median scenario, the total resident population would be 8% lower than today, and the working age population 21% lower than today. So 1/5 of the working age population will be missing in 25 years. There will be a large increase of dependency ratio. So now we have 6 children and old people for every 10 working age people. According to this the projection, we will have 9 children and old people every 10 working age people in 2050. If we use that decomposition in the mechanical way, the effect on real GDP per capita growth of this change in the composition of the Italian population, the dependency ratio, means a reduction of annual growth of real GDP by 0.6% per year. It is a huge number. That is just mechanical, nothing special. Of course, ceteris paribus, but that means that demographic might, by itself, might have a heavy toll on the country's living standard. Another warning, of course, that there is large uncertainty. There are many assumptions behind these projections. That is just a chart to give you an example from the publication by ISTAT. And it is a chart that is a probabilistic projection of the evolution of the population. I cut at 2050 because I'm interested until 2050. The projections go until 2080. And that is for one of the crucial parameters enters the projection, and it is the fertility rate. That is the current fertility rate, 1.24 or 25. And we can see that in the range of values goes from 1.1 up to 1.75. So in 2050. So if you choose a different parameter, you can have a very different trajectory. But if you put together the information, all the parameters, and you consider the 90% confidence interval published by ISTAT, you have something like that. This is the 95 competence interval. And you can see that, of course, the size of the variation over time is quite different, but the overall trend does not change. So we are facing a shrinking of the Italian population, well, no, of the population resident in Italy, to be more correct, and we are facing a shrinking, substantial shrinking of the working age population. So even in the most favorable scenario, that is the upper limit of 90%, this happens. So the next part of my talk is to ask what demographic variables, if you allow me to use this term, could change or could contrast in part of this dynamics. I focus on 4 variables that are still in the framework I've been discussing. The first one is working age population. Now, so far I've been talking about working age population as people between 15 and 64 years of age. Of course, this is a totally conventional limit. And we can discuss, we can clearly debate about these limits. On the one side, it is much, 15 years is much too low. People now stay at school much longer, so at least we should use 20 as a reference here. On the other hand, and that is what interested me more here, is that even 64 is too low as an upper age limit, because the improved quality of life and the improvement in health conditions allow people to work longer and up beyond 64 years of age. That is the positive aspect. But also statutory retirement age is much higher, is 67 now, and indexed to life expectancy, as the former president of INPS could explain us in better terms. That is, I'm not saying it is the bad side of the coin, but many people would be happy to retire earlier than at 67. And we see this in the data, because the employment rates for 65, 69, and 70, 74 increased, especially 65 to 69 years. That is the employment rate for this class of age. And that this increase is an important component of the rise in permanent employment in the very last period. Even for 70, 74, there was a small increase, but not so substantial. But even despite this increase, we are slightly below the European average. And if we had the German rates, there would be 340,000 more people working if we had the same rates of Germany in these age classes, and even more with the Swedish rates. So that is to say that there are possibilities that this part of the labor force will contribute to provide the missing labor input. The second variable is the working age employment rate. I already said something about this. We have an overall increase since at the end of the 70s, mainly driven from females, steady long run rising trend. For males, this is the chart. For males, we have a declining trend, but an increase in the last period. Again, reforms of the pension system matters here. So this is the dynamics. Let me spend 1 minute, and that is an example of the statistical problem approximations that I was discussing before. That is the implicit employment rate that I used in the composition. Why is that? Because the composition I showed before is based on national accounts data. And in national accounts, you have employment and you have an underlying total population that you can separate according to age. The implicit employment rate in national accounts is higher than the one measured in the labor force survey that is typically used to measure employment rate, participation rate, and so on. Why this? What is the reason of this difference? There are many reasons. Some are purely statistical discrepancies, of which we know little. But there are at least two important reasons why there is a difference. One is that in national accounts, I take total employment. I cannot separate total employment by age class. So the employment rate is somewhat artificial, and it includes people older than 64 at the denominator, but not at the numerator. But the second more important thing is that foreign workers that who are not recorded at the registry offices are included in national accounts, but are not included in the labor force survey. So these are workers that are illegally present in the country, or legal present but with a residence permit that do not register in the anagraphy. So there are these. The dynamics is the same, but you can see here that there is a slight difference. The difference opens up a bit, and it is when we have a large number of immigrants coming in the country. But here the point is that employment rates have been increasing a bit recently, but still are the lowest in Europe. This is a very well-known number. 60%, we have been discussing in politics and in media recently the fact that we had reached the highest employment rate since the series has been constructed at 60.1%, but we are still 10 percentage points below the European average net of Italy, and 15 points or more, 17 points below Germany. And the differences are even more striking for women. So again, I make the same kind of calculation I made before, taking the German rates, for example. If we had the employment rate of Germany, we would have 6 million people in employment more than we have now. So it's a substantial number. And again, you can see this is the impact that we can estimate in the composition is between, it is 0.5% per year, the increase in real GDP per capita growth, with the European average, even higher, 0.8 with the German rate. So increasing the employment rate itself, but this is rather, it is just mechanics, of course. I'm not saying it is easy, can have a substantial impact to offset some of the trends. What about mean worked hours? I said already the two things written here. And this is the line for the series, for the plot for the hours of work, annual hours per work. This is an average, as I said. Here is when contracts change things, and here is the spread of part-time and temporary work. So I already commented this. Again, what can we say about part-time? Part-time, looking at the last available data for 2019, a large share of part-time in Italy was, according to the declaration of people in the labor force survey, involuntary, in the sense that people accepted a part-time job because we are not able to find a full-time job. So that means that a substantial amount of work is lost, at least according to the declared preferences of people. And it is something that we could estimate on the basis of labor force survey data in terms of 6% of total hours. And again, that could allow us to recover part of this labor lost with this shrinking working age population. Last, the most delicate variable from a political point of view, migrations. Here is where the projections are very uncertain. That is a citation from the report by ISTAT, migration flows marked by profound uncertainty. And indeed, that is the net migration inflow. So that's the difference between people coming from abroad and registering and recording at the registry office, net of the people leaving Italy. That is history, and this is the projection. So you can see that there is a very large variation according to the median scenario. The median scenario by ISTAT has a very strong net inflow of over 200,000 people net, and then goes down stable to 165,000. It's very interesting if you compare this, the last release of ISTAT projections, so instead the previous release in 2022, what you could see is that this number increased substantially. ISTAT had a much lower net inflow rate, and probably it took into account the flow decreed by the government that allows 150,000 immigrants to enter the country on average in the period 23-25. But these are still number below those in the projection. So it is very difficult to predict net migration flows. There is some important support in the dynamics of the Italian population according to the projections by ISTAT. It is very difficult to underestimate the importance of foreign workers in Italy. They are now 10% of the employed, but in some sectors are even more, 18% in agriculture and 16% in construction. So if they were not in the country, our economic system would have a problem to work. Now, what do we ask foreign people to do? Basically, what they do, foreign workers tend to fill unskilled and low-paid jobs that are less susceptible to native Italians. And I would conclude that there tend to be a complementarity between native and immigrant labor. That was the evidence that we collected in a paper, old paper that I wrote with Alfonso Nosoria and Piero Cipollone 20 years ago, but still seems valid. And I found this chart rather impressive. That is, each point is a Wincktile point, the Wincktile group. So this point here is the average of the bottom 5% of the weekly earnings distribution according to INPS data. That is the next, and so on. So that is the average level. And on the vertical axis, you have the proportion of people that were born abroad. These are numbers that are not perfect for many reasons, but that is what we found, what we had in 1990, that is 2000, and that is 2019. So all the increase, or by far the largest proportion of the increase of foreign workers went to the bottom, that is 1, 2, 3, 4. So this is the bottom 20% of the weekly earnings distribution. So immigrants are essential for the function of the Italian economy, and we ask immigrants to do the bad jobs in the Italian economy. This is only for employees and regular employees recorded in the INPS archives. I hope that Daniele won't criticize this data. Now, bottom line of what I've said so far, can amount of work increase? So we have a shrinking population in Italy. We cannot do much to change that trend, apart from migrations. But we have also a substantial amount of underutilized labor. This is large and sufficient to offset, if activated, the negative effects of demographic trends. That is, in theory, what I tried to show you, much more difficult in practice, where you have to have policies that allow you to do that. For immigration, the ability to attract immigrants depends on the performance of the economy. It is not only the fact that people want to come to Italy and stay here. We have to attract and insert them in the economy, and so the economy must be growing. And we have to have proper integration policies. So the migration policies are essential for attracting immigrants. About working time, it is unlikely that we can stop the secular trend in reducing the times worked by full-time, full-year people, working full-year people. That is a secular trend that is something important, because non-working time, call it leisure if you want, is important, is a component of well-being. Even if we are still very far from Keynes' prediction of the 15 hours per week that he predicted for his grandchildren about our time. And finally, we have the employment rates that, as we saw, can increase substantially if we look at other countries. But this is difficult to make, depends again on the economy, but also we should take into account that for many of the people who are not employed now, the skills and the competencies are insufficient to get a job, and often they are resident in backward areas. So there is an issue of labor demand. So that was the first part, most on demographic elements, the one that worried me or concerned me more. Let me spend, now I'm even more general and imprecise in the last part. What about technological progress? As I've shown with the first decomposition, the post-war history shows us that productivity is the driver of real GDP per capita. On the other hand, we are facing a period of great innovation. It has been cited already in artificial intelligence, robotics, automation. We all are discussing these issues. So how is Italy doing? Can the prolonged economic decline be reversed? Let me spend a couple of words on robotics. This part I'm even more speculative. I'm sure that in this room there are people that are far more expert than I am of structural changes and innovation. But this is industrial robotics in manufacturing in selected countries. Basically the main Western countries. And this is the operational stock of robot. This industrial robot is defined as an automatically controlled and programmable and multi-purpose machine. That is a definition used by the International Association for Robotics, or something like that. And you can see that in terms of number of robots in the stock, Italy is faring not too bad. It is the fourth country after Japan, US, Germany. There are two missing countries here, China and Taiwan, that have more robots than Italy. But otherwise, we are a country with a large number and also a large number of installations. France and Spain have less. If we take the ratio in terms of hours, so just robots per worked hours, we can see that there is a tendency to use more robots. Italy, that is stronger in Spain, but of course in this, the composition of the manufacturing sector matters a lot, because if you produce cars, it is more likely that you use robots than if you produce textiles. Germany is the country moving very, very fast. But look at US. US has started much later than Europeans, but increased very rapidly. So what can we say about automation and robotics? OECD has produced many numbers about the impact of automation on the advanced economies. According to OECD estimates, Italy is among the most vulnerable economies. The last estimates said that 15% of jobs in Italy are at high risk of automation, and another 36% have a high probability of being significantly modified by technical progress. So there is, and even the use of term vulnerability is significant. Now, then we have the well-known paper by Acemoglu and Strepo for the US, and remember the US had that strong increase, and they found that for each installed robot, 6 manufacturing jobs disappeared in the US in the manufacturing sector, that reduced to 3 now great, taking into account all indirect effects and positive effects on labor demand and other sectors. My colleague in Ancona, Dottori, has replicated the analysis by Acemoglu and Strepo on Italian data, and they could find any effect on employment. And also another paper looking at 17 countries, including Italy, found a negative impact on low-skilled jobs, but not on total employment. So that is the fact that automation robotics, there are great worries about the human effect in terms of jobs. On the other hand, it can be also a way to improve the working of the manufacturing sector and to keep it competitive. And that is what seems to have happened in Europe, essentially. Now, I'm coming to an end. It's time to. And I want just to make 3 very general points on technological change. And there are 3 quotations. The first is, let's say, that is the view by Brandolini and McAfee. Let's call them the optimist. Well, not necessarily optimist, but those are the people who started first to study what was going on. And they have this view that the process is irreversible. Is that an irreversible transformation? We don't know. I don't think there is anything irreversible in economics, in economy. But that is the view. Somewhat optimistic in many ways, but also the idea that innovation is manna from heaven, not a human product. The second view is the recent view by Acemoglu and Johnson in the recent book, Poverty and Progress. Let me just read here. Digital technologies and artificial intelligence undermine jobs and democracy, through excessive automation, massive data collection, and intrusive surveillance. I was talking to Taron, who was in Italy, and he's on the extreme pessimistic side. He's really very, very pessimist about the prospects of automation and especially artificial intelligence. The third view, the one on which I will almost stop my presentation, is Tony Atkinson. And Tony Atkinson was a great, the most important economist studying inequalities, at least in my view, possibly in the view also of Salvatore. And the very last book, not the last, well, it was the last published book by Tony Atkinson, was Inequality, What Can Be Done. And Tony went through basically all his life analysis, and he wrote down 15 proposals to fight inequality. Concrete proposals. And it is very interesting that proposal number 1 in the book was about technological change. And Tony wrote the direction of technological change should be an explicit concern of policymakers, encouraging innovation in a form that increases the employability of workers and emphasizes the human dimension of service provision. human dimension of service provision is very interesting because if you read, I think that it is in The Last Economist, but you can read it often. In Japan, they are pushing a lot the use of automation and artificial intelligence to provide services to a population, just to the old, for caring the elderly in Japan. So the human dimension is missing for sure. Even if on the positive side, I was reading in Nature last week, apparently artificial intelligence diagnostic programs work on average better than physical doctors. We will see. I'm a bit skeptical, but it is important that this focus of Tony, that was mainly a public finance economist, on technological change, and that goes back to his very first paper with Joe Stiglitz, in which he showed that the trajectory of technological change is not determined. It depends on the choices made by people. I had a discussion with Tony about this point because I was a bit more, let's say, skeptical, because he talked about something about what in Italy is called CNEL, as the place where to discuss these issues. And I cannot imagine a discussion about the future of technological change at CNEL now. So I told him, I don't know whether it will work, but certainly the point is that we need to have a policy debate, political debate on this. So let me conclude. I've talked even too much. I'm afraid that in my presentation, I raised more questions than I gave answers. But the first point is that the shrinking and aging of Italy's population is significant and not reversible, at least in the medium term. Medium meaning 25 years. It is almost long from many point of view. So there is not much that we can do. Discussing about raising the birth rate is talking about the following period. It is not. Actually, if we increase the birth rate substantially now, we will have an increase in the dependency rate, and the last term will put even more pressure on this shrinking working age population. The second point is the only thing that I really contributed in this paper is to show that there is an underutilized labor in Italy, and there are margins to increase the use of this labor. And these margins might offset some part of the negative demographic trends. Now, another question that I didn't discuss, if you look at the work of some demographers, they would say that we have a suboptimal age structure for economic growth, because if you have an aged population, that is not optimal for economic growth. Now here, there are two dimensions. Here I mention only one, how individual productivity changes with age matters. This is an old question on which we have very little hard data and hard evidence. There is a nice paper, I always liked that paper by Ray Fair, and that is in a way hard evidence. He looked at record men and record women in I think in the US or possibly in the rich countries. And he estimates that the performance between 35 and 60 years of age worsens by 17% for 100 meters sprinters, by 23% for marathon runners, and by 5% only for chess players. That means that, of course, with aging, there is a reduction in individual productivity. Here it is easy to measure. Of course, you cannot measure that for workers in the factories because they work all together. But it tells us that there are also important differences dependent on the tasks that people are asked to perform. And from that point of view, we could look at automation less negatively than we tend to do. The other question, well, sorry, I said that I mentioned only one. There is another important question that I didn't write down, that is the demand side of that. Aging population means a considerable change in the composition of demand and of consumption. And of course, that has an implication for the things that a country produces or does not produce. The last question is, can it reap the benefits of the new wave of innovations and reverse its economic decline? And is it possible to govern technological change? I pose that as a question, as questions for the general debate. I don't have an answer. After at least 25 years that I've been studying the economic decline of Italy, I tend to be a bit pessimistic, even if I must say that the last couple of years I saw some interesting changes in the structure of the Italian productive system. We can discuss for long, as I said before. Probably many in this room would emphasize a lot the demand side. I tend to be concerned about the supply side, but the discussion is opened on this issue. After 25 years, when we started to talk about economic decline, I don't think that we have still a concrete answer. My last slide is about what I didn't discuss. 3 crucial but totally ignored issues I briefly mentioned. The first one is that my focus was entirely on per capita GDP. Of course, per capita GDP that I use as an indicator of standard of living is important. But if you look at other dimensions, like geopolitical power or public debt sustainability, it is the total GDP that matters. And from that point of view, the shrinking population is not a good sign. I'm not so concerned about geopolitical power, I must say, but that is one of the issues that is debated. The second missing point I mentioned right at the beginning is that per capita income is a very partial, imperfect, and unsatisfactory measure of human progress. There are many other things. So, for example, I mentioned briefly the change in working hours means more time for, let's call it leisure, or for your own activities that are not made in the market, and that is part, in my view, of progress. Probably not in the US, but for sure it is in Europe. So if we have a broader view of well-being, we cannot be very happy about using only per capita income. And the last point is that all along I talked about average values. I totally ignore all huge disparities in distribution of income, wealth, and all other variables, except for the chart on immigrants. And of course, that is, inequality is a topic on which I've been working a lot, but this is totally ignored here. So that's all. Many thanks for your attention.
Thank you to Dr. Brandolini. So perhaps we have time for 1 or 2 quick questions from the audience.
Yes. Thank you, Andrea. Very, very interesting lecture. Starting from one of the main points of your presentation, which is the main contribution of productivity, of labor productivity to the growth, which is an evidence, in fact, for the past at least. So far, in fact, new trend. I mean, there is a very interesting book whose title is "Fully Grown." I don't know if you read about that. It's by Jones and Van Wright, 2 authors who worked very much all the time on growth. Fully Grown. The subtitle is "Why Stagnant Economy is a Sign of Success." Yeah? So meaning that according to them, productivity growth is not going to grow more than what we've seen so far, despite the fact that if there can be wave of technology advancement such as robotization and automatization. So basically, we should not expect for the future larger productivity of what we have seen so far. Can you reflect on that? I mean, what do you think about that?
Any other question? Okay, the last one, because we have no time.
Thank you, Andrea. That was very stimulating, and certainly raised a lot of questions in my mind. One of which was sort of mentioned at the end of your talk, which is the going back as well to the growth accounting, which was quite simple, but as well like illuminating the productivity and the role of productivity and the interaction with the other, so the interdependence of productivity with all the rest of the variables. And in particular, there is one that you didn't do alone, you didn't mention, and I was wondering what you think about, is the relationship between the productivity itself and the age composition, but as well the gender composition, and how the age composition and gender composition may also interact with specific sectors of production. And with sector of production, I also include the public administration as well, because there in particular, we also have a strong bias in the age composition of our sort of working group in the public administration. And linked to this question is the issue of migration. So you said that one of the main reasons for the gap between the national accounting data and the labor force survey data is due potentially to illegal migrant workforce. And so I was wondering there if one of the policies should also be to crack down on illegal workforce, which could also, by means of exploitative work condition, affect productivity as well, and sort of runs into the circle of the trade-off between efficiency and distribution issues, which you mentioned at the end. So whether the distributional issues, which is also driving strong decline of the bottom share of the
to show the contribution of each component and to focus on some, but the interactions are absolutely crucial. I mentioned at the end the one between productivity and the age. You draw our attention to the gender composition. Honestly, I cannot say, I have no idea. In my view, my colleagues, my female colleagues are more productive than my male colleagues in certain, for many tasks. So the point of your, I mean, to be serious, you have two issues in your questions about gender composition. One is the gender itself, whether it might have a relevance for individual and then collective productivity. The other is the composition of the sectoral composition. But the sectoral composition need not be maintained forever. I mean, the fact that women worked in the textile sectors and still work can change. The fact that we have women mainly teaching in school, well, mainly women teaching in schools, again, might change. In the past, we had probably more males than females. I mean, so the composition of the workforce in terms of productivity is a reflection of the sector composition itself. So we have to be, I realize that I'm confused, but we have to disentangle what is the individual contribution to productivity from the one that is the working in a collective framework. So that is what makes rather difficult to understand the gender aspect. But the same for age. I mean, the example I took for age are very specific, where there is an individual looking for a definite, pushing a definite objective. About migrations, well, I would not use the term crack down on illegal migration. So that you use that, right? Well, we should crack down on all illegal work. That's difficult, as the former president knows very well. The point is that let me generalize a bit. We tend to ignore the contribution of migrants in this country. We tend to ignore that much of the changes that we saw in income distribution are due to the fact that the burden of the changes were was brought by migrants. So it's a strange country, but that is not only Italy. There was a beautiful, very insightful article in Financial Times the other day discussing that it is for all rich countries where you are especially right wing, but also on the left wing in some places where you are very strong against immigration, depicting immigration in terms of refugees or people coming by boats, but then you open to all migrations because it is necessary for the work of the system. The debate in the UK is even worse than the debate in Italy from that point of view. I'm lost. So, but okay, stop here. About the point by Pasquale, I don't know the book. Actually, I will look at that book. That's in part is implicit in my mention of the capability approach. So we need the different measures or not indicators, measures and concepts of progress. Part of the story is also more standard economics, and that is the switch from manufacturing to services make the rate of growth that we are used to measure less significant and less able to increase. It might be a problem of measuring appropriately the value added of services. Or it might be the problem of the famous Bebon story, the fact that to play a concert or a quintet, you need 5 people. So there is no possibility of increasing productivity. But actually, it can increase in terms of, if instead of having 1 concert per week, they could have 2 concerts per week. So that would increase the value added of the service sector. But exactly, I agree with your point. And so, but I stand more with the change in perspective. I think that we have to change the perspective. I've been working on all this beyond GDP stuff. On the capability approach with Amartya Sen was visiting the Bank of Italy 25 years ago. After 25 years ago, we wrote much, but I'm not entirely happy with the results we obtained. So it's very difficult to challenge the predominance of GDP in debate in economics. Also because there is no alternative, concrete and credible measures. I mean, Human Development Index worked well, but was a partial thing. So we have to invest even more in research. I mean, to arrive at this measure of GDP, it took from 1945, so 50 years and more. So we need to invest more on alternative measures. But still, once said, and I stop, we need to increase income. It is a bad proxy, but still is an important element of well-being, as it is.
Io sì, se abbiamo iniziato anche un po' più tardi. Sì.